Style, sophistication, innovation. Three words that describe rock legend Bryan Ferry. With Roxy Music, his sound influenced every generation, from punk to Franz Ferdinand, while his ultra-cool look established him as one of the world's great style gurus. Taking a trip through London discussing Ferry's career landmarks is renowned rock journalist David Hepworth, founder of Q and The Word magazines, and the man who presented Live Aid. Their journey begins in Ferry's studio, where he's just finished his latest album, Dylan-esque, a typically Ferry-esque homage to Bob Dylan.
Brian.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Good to see you, yes.
So, is this where you spend ridiculous amounts of your time?
I try not to now, but I have spent a lot of time in here. This is quite a small studio, good for vocals, guitars, but for the whole band it's a bit small. So you want separation from each instrument, so we go to a bigger studio for that. I think there's a lot to be said for organic recording with humans in the same room, you know, interacting as they make the music. I've done it the other way, you know, and believe me, it's much more interesting if you work in a more conventional way altogether.
So take us back to the early 70s when you and Roxy Music were making your first records. Where were you making them and what were sessions like? How much time did you have? How much money did you have?
The first album we did was the first Roxy Music album, and that was in Piccadilly. It was quite a smart address, really. I think it was an old viewing theatre. It was called Command Studios. So it had kind of audience seats there, rows of seats downstairs, and upstairs a control room. Oh, really? I guess where the projectionist box was. So we had to run down to the theatre and perform, and run up to have a listen to it, up this spiral staircase into like this projection room. After we did that first album, we moved to Air Studios in Oxford Circus, which is another great address. And we made several albums there.
Tell me about Bob Dylan then, when Bob Dylan first struck you.
I didn't really find Dylan my kind of cup of tea until he actually turned electric. I was into black American music, R&B, Memphis, the Stax people, Otis Redding and so on. And you had to have an electric guitar and a mohair suit. Dylan came from another culture, folk music, sandals, beards. He was a young lad from the Midwest of America, and he probably grew up listening to some of the same music I grew up listening to in Durham, in Newcastle, in the northeast of England. Leadbelly was the first person I remember hearing who I thought, wow, this is amazing, blues music. Then he went to New York, Greenwich Village, home of poetry readings, you know, poetry cellars, jazz and folk clubs, and people like Allen Ginsberg, the poet, and I think this obviously had a huge effect on him. And suddenly he became a poet.
And all this stuff that he'd learned was kind of channeled into the pop charts, wasn't it?
It's interesting that doing this album, that some of the songs we covered, you felt you were covering Jimi Hendrix, who popularised All Along the Watchtower, or the Byrds. All I Really Want to Do. They took Dylan songs into the charts, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, I was talking to Neil Tennant of the Pet Shop Boys recently, and he told me that he got a similar feeling from the first Roxy Music album. The idea that loads of ideas were suddenly introduced into the mainstream through the vehicle of a pop group. Were you conscious of doing that at the time?
First album, I was conscious that it was more of a kind of indicator of how many different paths you could go down if you wanted to do that, because each song was very different from the next song. Each song was like 3 songs compressed into one, so it was quite an interesting record in that respect.
I think a lot of people think you probably can't get away with that in the music business, that their traditional idea of the music business is always some guy standing over your shoulder saying, no, you can't do that, it's too complicated. But there isn't, is there? Or is there? Was there anybody telling you, no, this is too arty, too strange?
Only when I carried the tape around trying to get a record deal. And I wouldn't leave the tape with anyone. I used to always sit in their office while they played it, you know. And they'd always say, oh, well, this is great, it's the music of the future, you know, and come back next year. And that was basically the answer I got all the time, because I was like the spokesman and carrying the thing around, and eventually found some enlightened ex-public school boys, in fact, in King's Road, and they were called EG Management. And they signed me up immediately with Roxy.
What were you like as a personality at the time? Did you develop a thick skin quite quickly?
I was convinced that the music was good, or that it had some quality of some kind. You know, it wasn't for everybody's taste, of course. I really thought it would be more of the kind of music you'd play at art colleges or something, and have a kind of a young kind of art crowd type of audience, rather than cross over into mainstream.
But you kind of relished the pop merry-go-round, didn't you? You're one of the first groups I remember. When you appeared on Top of the Pops with a new single, there would be a new look, wouldn't there? There'd be a bit of a sense of occasion about it.
Yeah, we wanted to bring a bit of theatre. We could have done much more, really, looking back.
Can we just have a wander around and look at some of... You've got some
sure.
fantastic old keyboards over there.
Yeah,
If we just have a look.
Yeah. Each one has its own sound, you know. I mean, obviously each one has many sounds within it, but there's sometimes one particular sound that each keyboard has. Like
This is a fairly old one, you would say.
this is an old one. I mean, if you know the hit Stevie Wonder Superstition, it features on that. It's that sound.
Here's the kind of the Casio PT1.
That's for my more avant-garde pieces. That way.
This thing, which to modernise will look like a cross between a telephone exchange and a game of battleships.
Exactly. This is the VCS3 synthesizer, which Brian Eno used on the first couple of Roxy albums. And the sounds from the guitars or keyboards, piano, anything, would go through this, and he would modify it through this bewildering system of little pins.
So, have you hung on to this for sentimental reasons, or do you still use it?
We did use it on the last Roxy tour, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to get some of the sounds from the early records.
Okay. Well, I think we're going for a drive now.
Let's take the Audi, should we?
Why not? It's a unique circumstance, isn't it, that most people never know, is that you get into a band with a bunch of chaps in your early 20s, and then many, many years later, your lives are still, whether you like it or not, connected. You know,
Well,
you're
luckily,
like in a form of family that goes on forever.
Luckily, I was very good at, I think, at picking people, and I've always tried to work with good people, and it makes you look good if you work with good people. And I think. Yeah, I was very lucky that the people I chose to work with were all characters, like Brian Eno, Andy Mackay, Phil Manzanera, Paul Thompson.
But you must have had fallings out with those people over the years.
Creative relationships have to have some sort of conflict in them. Normally, we didn't really fall out at all. Actually, we just drift apart for a bit, you know. We weren't the sort of people who would have blazing rows.
Right.
Really, at all.
Now, how did you drift back together again? Who was the leader of that? Anybody?
Well, I suppose I had to make the call, really. The first time that I stopped, that I ceased group activity, as it were, was 76 or something. In 78, I think I brought the band back together to do Manifesto. So we'd had a kind of a year or two apart, and then got back together again. We did 3 more albums, and then we stopped working together for a long time. Some people like being in a band or in a group of people more than others. You know, I've never been a clubby type of person in that sense. Although it can be great when you choose it. You know, to say, hey, let's work together and do a project.
Right.
So in 2001,
the radio is gone, and we've noticed it. Oh, there you go. Was that timing?
Yeah. I think I was becoming a bit of a bore.
The radio interrupted.
Yeah.
After the break, Brian and David visit the Tate Modern to view the works of the artist who influenced Roxy Music, and they look ahead to Brian's upcoming nationwide tour.
The UK and Europe.
you know your way around London?
Reasonably well. There are certain districts I'm a bit hazy about. When I graduated, I was very fortunate to get a scholarship from the Royal College of Art for 1 year, which was a travelling scholarship. And I travelled around London and did my work, and it helped me to really write, give me some of the time to start writing my first songs,
right,
which became the first Roxy Music album. In that sort of period when I was trying to make ends meet and support myself, one of the jobs I did was driving.
Oh, what,
driving
professionally?
Vans, driving,
really? Right.
Driving white vans around London.
Oh, really? What were you delivering? Anything in particular?
I was working for a removals firm, so it was kind of rather sad job, moving people from one flat to another.
I suppose there's a story with everybody, isn't there?
There is, yeah. It's a good way of learning how to get around London, really.
You see, my theory is that the only people who really know their way around London are people who've come to London from outside London,
yes,
and have learnt it because they've had to. Whereas Londoners, in my experience, are notoriously bad at it. Having said that, let's not get lost. So, Brian, here we are at the top of Tate Modern. Do you come here often?
Yeah, I try to come here every now and then. Depends what's showing, really. And I'm coming here in a couple of weeks for the Gilbert and George exhibition up there. They're putting on, which I think would be good.
So we're looking out rather than looking in at the moment, and it's splendid.
It is. It's great. I don't get a chance really to be up here like this and in the private rooms, and it's a wonderful view. I never get to see this side of London really, being over on the west side all the time.
What do you think of the marrying of ancient and modern here? Do you think it's successful?
I prefer the ancient in this particular case, although I love that gherkin.
We like the gherkin
over there, which is it's a good looking building. That.
So London with a bit of sun on it from a vantage point like this.
And I like modern architecture if it has some kind of point to it. You know, you see some great things over, and I was just saying in Hong Kong and the Far East, where they do tend to build some incredible modern buildings.
Okay.
I've always loved New York for that reason. For the skyline is amazing. But when you stand here, I think you I always get drawn to the old classic one there.
You can't upstage St Paul's, can you really? You'd be wasting your time, wouldn't you?
It's a beautiful thing.
Let's go and look at the work of one of the men who drew you to London, I suppose.
All right. Hamilton. Good.
So, Brian, we're amongst the Richard Hamilton, and he taught you.
Yeah, I went to Newcastle in '64, and it was. I was there for 4 years, and I was lucky to get the last year, really, of Richard's teaching. He stopped teaching after that.
Did any of this play any part of the formation of your music?
I think that Richard is certainly a big influence for a young art student to be like with a kind of legendary sort of artist, and the whole thing about pop art is that it was modern. You know, it was relating to the things that interested me. Basically, Americana, because all my musical, most of my musical influences had been American ones. And so it was kind of meat and drink to me, you know, Cadillacs and all these kind of consumer things, a toaster and so on. I mean, these are very different kind of objects that the artist was using as subject matter than flowers or landscapes. And they're all about the artifacts of our normal lives.
Right.
And,
So you were attracted to the idea of doing something serious with a load of things that you were just attracted to anyway because they were part of daily life.
The great thing about Richard's work is that he was a kind of user of collage. He used to collage different elements together, and he did a very famous seminal work, and it's a collage of all the different. There's a guy, a bodybuilder, next to a pin-up. It was a kind of very influential thing for me because the whole thing about early Roxy music was collaging different genres together into the same song, piece of music. And so, in that sense, he was very influential.
Well, I don't know anything about art, but I do know that Alan Bennett says it's a wonderful thing, but it's very hard on the feet. So let's go and get in the car.
Okay. Yeah.
So you got one of these?
I have, yeah, fantastic car. And he would say that, wouldn't he? But it's actually the best car I've driven. And I've driven the Bentley Continental and you know, Ferrari, all sorts I've driven. But this is the best, by far, all-round car I've ever had.
What's your ideal driving experience?
I think. Well, a beautiful day with mine has a sunroof open, and on a beautiful, curving road.
Right. Yeah.
In, say, going through the Highlands of Scotland or something like that.
Right. Going back to this thing on stage, do you find it physically draining?
Oh, it's very tiring, yeah. I mean, it's not... It depends. If you're feeling great, it usually is fine. But if there's something slightly wrong, which is then it can be quite bad, because your voice is your instrument.
Yeah.
And your body is your instrument, and I think I always thought it'd be great to be a guitarist.
Hide behind it.
Well, no, you just play, have a great time, make a great noise and whatever. But so even if you've got a bad head, you can still play. But
yeah. If
you've got a sore throat or anything, it can be pretty scary because then you have the knock-on effect. You've got to do it the next day and the next day and so on. You've got this great series of dates looming in front of you. That's why singers get cranky and diva-ish, like, Callas and Pavarotti and so on. You always see them with great scarves around their neck, with fighting air conditioning, or airplanes, or hotel freezing rooms. And I don't know. It's you become quite cranky, or can do quite easily. I've been very fortunate. I mean, I got through the last couple of tours very well. So.
Did you used to look after your voice when you first started, or is that something you only learned?
I don't look after it now, but I try to, obviously make more of an effort to try and be fit to really do it.
Right.
But not to the extent of some people, like running 10 miles a day, or whatever they do. I'm not that serious about it.
So have you got a theme for this tour or anything? Is it just the...
It's basically to play the new material with the album. So my plan is to play most of it, if not all of it, and a few other things. We'll see what the band play best. Generally, people want to hear things they know, of course.
Yeah.
So it's quite a tricky balance you have to get. Make it interesting for yourselves and for those in the audience who like to hear obscure tracks.
Entertainment and improvement.
Thank you very much.
And as they always say in the rock and roll interview, the oldest cliche, good luck with the tour.